Welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting on October 22nd, 2 p.m. May I have roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Tufenkian?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Madam Chair Shire?
Here.
Thank you. All present.
Thank you. Number 2 on the agenda is the posting of the agenda for this meeting. It was posted on or before Tuesday, October 16th, 2012, on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Item number 3, approval of the minutes from August 27th, 2012. Are there any comments or corrections?
Didn't have any.
Okay,
I have a question on page 3.
page 3.
Yeah, for the motion,
Yes.
move to not approve.
Which number are you on?
6B,
6B,
motion, and below that, move to not approve.
approve. You are correct. That was a motion to approve.
Good catch.
Yeah, that could look bad tomorrow night.
Yeah, that would look good.
We will verify that that is the case, but I believe it's all of our memory that the motion was to approve the...
Yes. Yes. Okay, if there's no other comments, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Is that one correction?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second. Roll call.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
And Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Tufenkian?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Madam Chair Shire?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Item 4, oral communications, and we don't have any today. So we'll move to item 5. Any comments from the commissioners?
I'd like to thank the Glendale Historical Society for a fabulous annual home tour. They did a fantastic job. It was Glendale's Golden Age, distinctive homes of 1920s and 30s. It was on September 30th. Very well organized, very well attended. I met people from all the way from Malibu, and I hear there were people all the way from San Diego. So thank you very much for putting on the annual tour. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a. I would just like to make a brief announcement about an event coming up on Saturday, November 3rd, at the Los Angeles Central Library. There will be a presentation on a new book that has just come out in limited edition. It's called William Ray, A Long Walk Downtown. And this book summarizes and beautifully illustrates the photographic work of William Ray, who was a street photographer who worked very extensively in the L.A. area between around 1936 and his death in 1991. There are 40,000 photographs that he took in the Sacramento State Library, and his son Patrick recently made a book of his works. These are works in Patrick's personal collection that beautifully illustrate the growth and development of the Los Angeles area over a very long period of time. So not only is it historic, but it's really beautiful photography. And the presentation, again, will be Saturday, November 3rd at the Public Library, which is at 630 West 5th Street in Los Angeles, from 2 to 4:30 p.m. It is free and open to the public and will be held in the Taper Forum. So I just wanted to make that information available. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Then we'll move on to item 6, old business, talking about commissioner-generated proposals.
And as of today, we have no outstanding commissioner-generated proposals, and we will be taking care of the discussion item today about possible changes to historic district fee structure and refund policy. And if you have any ideas for the future, we could take them now, or we could just leave it blank for another month.
Anything to add? Okay. And we will move on to 7, which is new business, 7A, review of property owners' fulfillment of work conditioned as part of the Mills Act contracts.
Okay, as the commission knows, more often than not these days, as you review Glendale Register properties and make visits to the site, you find certain aspects of the property that could be improved through repair or alteration in some way. So we obviously keep track of those. We put them into the Mills Act contract, so they're formally recognized as a commitment that the owner has to make. We give them a timeline that we agree upon at the hearing generally or shortly after, and then we hold them to that. We do make extensions. We're fairly comfortable when we know that the property owner is acting in good faith and either something has come up or they just request a little more time. If we trust that things are going to move forward, we're going to make an extension. So those are all noted on this form that I gave you, the chart that you have. And then we have a lot of completed items. And when we talked about this last year, I don't think I showed any photographs. So I thought what I would do this year is show you photographs that show the before and after conditions so you can get a sense of where the work has taken the property and how your judgment is in terms of what you ask for and what you expect to make sure it looks like what you're hoping for. So we would start with 1117 Rossmoyne in what's now the Rossmoyne Historic District, but wasn't when this was designated. And this is a case where we granted a fairly long extension to the homeowner, knowing that this work would be done in good faith. And the issue was, I don't have a before picture for this one, but there was a metal garage door that was kind of dented and kind of looked like a metal garage door. You asked to have a wood door put in, and the owner consulted with me, and we moved forward and kind of chose a very simple wood design that seems appropriate to Spanish colonial house. And here's the result of this project. Probably not the most exciting of the things that you're going to see today. 2440 St. Andrews over in Chevy Chase Canyon. You remember this is Bert Farrar House, the founder of Chevy Chase Estates. So it's a very memorable house. And from your site visit, you might remember that down the hill, kind of a long path and stairway, there was this kind of open pergola with these brick columns in a circle. And there were a few columns that had been pushed down the hillside. The owner told us that the bricks were actually down at the bottom of the hill. They had people climb down the hill, salvage all of those bricks, and they rebuilt the 3 columns that are shown in this diagram. So they show them in these photos, and you can see it pretty much looks like they had never been pushed down the hill. So that's the circle is unbroken. So.
Great.
Excellent.
At 1640 Art Even, which is in Art Even Highlands Historic District also. This house, it was so tight, there were some aluminum sliding windows, and I'm not sure who was on the commission when this came forward, if anyone. So you have to take my word for this, because it's very hard to get photographs on the side of the house, but there are a few aluminum slider windows that they replaced with new wood windows that match the proportions and details of the other colonial revival style windows on the house. So this was, obviously these are from the inside, but this was successful completion, so we signed off on that. If you remember Casa de Carmen, when this came through, also known as the Jensen House on Grandview, also in what's now the North Cumberland Heights Historic District. Sorry, this picture looks a little blurrier than it did before. There were a number of kind of additions made to the house at the time that this side of the house was built, which was this portion of the house is an addition, and there was kind of an oingapachification of the house. Which I think that's the official term. But there were finials put on the posts at the fence. There was a kind of an archway put over the driveway, and there were these columns kind of placed in front of the main part of the house. So as part of the commission's conditions, you asked that some of these, not all, be removed. So these urns were allowed to stay. A few of the details, it was kind of a give and take. So here's the front of the house without the columns, and I'm sorry I couldn't find a better picture that showed the overall view, but the columns are gone. And then the arch that used to span over this pair is gone, and all of the kind of the ball finials that were on top of the posts are gone. And this work was done like a week after the designation. So this is probably our fastest Mills Act fulfillment. I could have shown this last year, but I didn't. So And then here's 1220 Cortez, and this is a house also in the Ross Moyne Historic District now. And in this case, there were several projects that were conditioned as part of the approval. And 2 of them have been completed, and a third has been granted an extension because of the scheduling of work in general. It just made sense to work on the pool house at a later date. So at the top here, you see the garage door. There are 3 garages at this house. This is the part that's attached or semi-attached to the house. And then there's this freestanding chauffeur's quarters that had the garage below. And the commission felt that this paneled door just wasn't quite right for the look of the house, especially when we had examples of what the original doors looked like. So a new door was made, and this is a much more exciting garage door project. I think probably a little more successful. It works really nicely. So that was done successfully. And then also in the backyard, and this is how, the Mills Act isn't just looking at things that we could see from the street. We're really looking at the totality of the site. So this fountain had been not working evidently for some time and had a lot of staining and buildup on it. So the owners actually restored the operation of the fountain. I chose not to show the video, but we have a video of the water churning out of the fish's mouth, and then had a restoration specialist infill paint and repair all of the tile work. And I believe this is Batchelder tile work. So it's Batchelder tile work. So it's a very successful project. Looks great. Here we have another fountain. If you remember this modern Asian ranch house on Greenmont near the country club. And you had asked, can't really tell, I'll go back to the, over on this far side of the house, there was kind of an inset patio that the bedroom and the living room open onto. And there's this nice little kind of Asian-style garden with the trellis and a fountain. And it wasn't in horrible disrepair, but the fountain wasn't working and the trellis needed some work. So the owners repaired the wood and repainted the wood, got all the plants going, and then they installed a new pump. And the water is now flowing again from the fountain. So again, this is a successful project. And I have a photo. I was going to put it, and then I couldn't find it. Just so you know, these owners went a step beyond. And if you remember, I think most of you were on the commission for this house, if not everyone. So the deck around the pool had kind of a coating that was applied to it that gave it kind of this random flagstone finish, and it was like a waterproofing coating, and it was peeling up in places. The owners removed that coating, pulled out the wood. The concrete was scored in square pattern with pieces of wood between the squares. They took all of that rotted wood out. They put new wood in, and it looks fantastic. So that was a nice sign of how owners are, working with us to do work that really enhances the properties, even when it's not a condition of work. And finally, here's 2990 Edgewick. This I don't think I even had time to update on the form. Part of it's completed because the entire house has been painted, and here is the finished product. And this is in keeping with what the commission was expecting to kind of have a white finish on the entire house. I can't tell in these photos. This was kind of a greenish yellow kind of color originally. And then the other condition for this project was to work on this brick wall. So I wanted to take this chance. They haven't done the work yet, but they've retained a landscape consultant, and they're thinking of ideas. And the concept at this point is to repair the wall where there's a crack in it. I think you can see it's kind of a little dislocated over here. And their goal, as of now, which hasn't been finalized, would be to stucco over this to create kind of a stucco wall finish. And when we looked at this, and this is the commission can certainly weigh in now if you have opinions on this, the brick on this wall, it never looked like it jived very well with the house, and we couldn't say for sure whether it was an original condition or a later condition. So my memory at this point is that you were open to a variety of treatments, but there was a sense that not only is this kind of a design feature to emphasize the horizontal lines of the house, but it also is a retaining wall, so it needs to be there to some degree. So when the owners told me that they were thinking of applying kind of a smooth stucco finish to this, that seemed appropriate to me, and but we haven't finalized anything. If you have any other thoughts, let us know.
What is the finish of the house itself again,
So
please?
it's all wood siding.
I think the smooth stucco finish seems to work.
I'm sure they'll probably put an address on it. They've also shown they're getting the bronze plaque for the house that they wanted to put on the wall, kind of toward the driveway side.
Why is stucco more relevant? I mean, whether or not it's an original feature or not, aside from that, it's a mid-century style house. Why would a stucco finish be more relevant than a
Well,
brick?
you can't see it. There's other stucco on the house. There's I wish I had the photo on the side of the house. There's a big stucco panel kind of running down the center of the two side facades. And then there were other locations of stucco on the house. So it's primarily wood. I shouldn't have said it was all wood. Brick, to my eye, this is kind of an aesthetic call because we don't know what the actual history is. This doesn't look quite right. There's a chance it's the original finish, so it's kind of our decision to determine what's appropriate. But because it's a masonry wall, the brick would be kept, and then the stucco would be applied to the masonry wall, so it's in keeping with that kind of hard, smooth texture. I don't think running wood across this would be appropriate. Leaving it as brick means, they'd end up repointing the whole thing, fixing it, and that's definitely a possibility. But somehow, given the kind of smooth, sleek quality of the house, the stucco seemed to be an appropriate way to go.
Jay, their intention is that dirt would all be re-landscaped. If I recall, it was all covered
they're
with
going to
landscape
re-landscape
when we
the whole
designated the house.
area. Yeah, if you guys remember this, there were these cypress trees that were running in front of the house, and they're all the little stumps right now. So, this whole area will be re-landscaped. Okay, and I think that was our last, that's the end of the show.
Great, thank you. That's
Thank
really
you very
helpful.
much.
Thank you.
That is
Nice work.
very
Thanks.
helpful.
And thanks to all the
Yeah.
homeowners, too.
No, I think each project looks really, really right. So.
Thank you for putting that together. Okay, next on the agenda is 7B, discussion regarding possible changes to fee structure and refund policy for historic district applications.
Okay, this was brought up by Commissioner Vartanian at the last hearing, and it's kind of a two-part thing. The discussion took it, I think, in a direction slightly different than what you were originally asking. But in terms, let's start with the refund policy. I think the question was, and correct me if I got it wrong, the idea that there's a possibility that a neighborhood group is going to move a historic district application through the process. We're going to start work on it, but at some point perhaps they might not get enough signatures to kind of move it forward to the next step, either the first petition or even the second petition. And the idea was, could we develop a refund policy to kind of acknowledge that? The city already has a refund policy for any kind of application, so the idea would be that we'd want to stick with the way we do it now, which is basically usually the property owner, in this case, whatever group filed the nomination, could ask for a refund. And they could ask for a full refund or a partial refund. And what staff does is we analyze approximately how much work went into the process up to the point that they asked for the refund, and then we make a recommendation. We could have a full refund, we could have a 50% refund. It's kind of, staff will make that recommendation and make findings. In terms of the amount of work that goes into a historic district, it's considerable from the very beginning. There's a lot of staff time that goes into reviewing these nominations and working with the community to kind of bring it through the process. We certainly aren't recouping our staff time through the fee. The fee right now was just raised last year. It's now $2,042 to apply. And this is an amended zone change fee. Since we're talking about overlay zones, it's a zone change. Typically, a zone change fee is $8,000 something. So there was already an acknowledgement that we're not going to totally disincentivize historic districts through a fee. And I can't say, when we talked about this internally, we felt we have a refund policy in place, and we could see how it goes if it came to that. We haven't gone there yet. But my sense is property owners and neighbors in historic districts should really understand their neighborhood well enough before they apply for a historic district to have a good sense that there's going to be support, rather than be surprised at the time of the petition. But of course, you can't necessarily know that. You might be surprised. And what we can say now is that we have the process in place, and we would certainly consider a refund based on kind of what we think the amount of staff time that had gone into it has already been.
So the refund policy that already exists, what types of applications does that exist for?
It's for everything.
Everything?
Everything. For a variance, for any type of fee that we charge for any kind of work that we do, the potential is there for a refund. It's probably, and Ellen, you might have a better idea, I would think it's usually for variances and other.
Yeah, it would typically be utilized with variances or CUP applications in cases where somebody applies for a CUP application and decides that they're not going to open a particular kind of business and they don't even need the CUP for that business. They might request a refund. I think from time to time we've also taken in applications for design review, and we collect a fee at that time, start scheduling hearings and processing it, but then the owner for some reason decides they're not going to do the project, they sell the property, and then they're like, well, I'm withdrawing my application, I'd like to get some of my application fee back.
Okay, so it sounds like it's generally for some type of withdrawal.
Typically, it's on account of the applicant withdrawing the application before the application gets to hearing, and then they'd be requesting some portion of their fee back.
Right, and then we have a structure that may not apply because we have so many steps in the historic district process, but we have a structure that establishes kind of percentages starting with application reviewed, meaning we looked at it, 10%, files or permit packets had been researched, another 15%, met with other departments or had inspections, 10%, just kind of down the line, met with the applicant, any correspondence or incomplete letters that went out, which doesn't really apply to our work, public notice preparation, which costs the city money to send out public notices, public hearing conducted, again, there's kind of more time and effort going into that, and then a category for other. So it's a fairly formal process that we've developed for other applications, so we don't want to create a new process for historic districts. That would also require an amendment to the ordinance for historic districts, which, maybe we'll do someday. But I think since we haven't had this problem, and I don't expect it's going to be a common problem, we might want to wait until the time comes and see how it goes, does the refund process actually work for the applicants or not.
And Jay, at this point, we've had 6 historic district applications, 5 of which have gone the whole process to designation.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have 1 outstanding application.
Right. So if I may, I think actually that you or somebody had suggested the refund policy hadn't really crossed my mind. So, it's nice to know that it's out there and it's something that we can think about. But I was suggesting more of some type of a tiered rate structure
Sure,
because
yeah, that's part 2.
The fee is really high, and then maybe, depending on what kind of tiers we might consider and how reasonable it is, maybe there wouldn't necessarily have to be a refund valve or, I don't know how the commission wants to approach this. And I don't know, and I don't know if you want to move there now and talk about sort of, all of this together,
or we
or
want to talk about the fee structure also, because if we've resolved the refund policy, that will work with our existing policy. We'll see if it ever comes up, and if it does, we can evaluate whether it was fair, if the commission felt it was fair or not, whenever that happens. In terms of the fee structure, staff agrees that it probably is a disincentive for a 15 or 30 property historic district to have a $2,000+ fee. We've thought about 2 possibilities, a 2-tiered structure and a 3-tiered structure. At some point, I don't know that the economy of scale, that middle tier is really going to be that effective. But one thought would be to have a break off of, whatever. We don't have a minimum size for historic districts. We haven't explored that, but we could talk about a district up to, for example, 50 properties at a lower fee, and then anything over 50 properties at the higher fee. And then when you start breaking that down on a per property basis and thinking about how many households are in the neighborhood who could help with the fee payment, which is usually the case. It's usually a group of people end up splitting the fee. That might be a fair way to look at it. And this is knowing that the fees are automatically going to be increasing probably every year, however, whenever we adjust fees, which has been on an annual basis lately. So, and this is also a policy decision. This doesn't have to be an ordinance amendment. So it's easier for us to, when we look at fees across the board, we could make the recommendation to have a two-tiered structure, if that's what the commission would like to see. And then also we could determine what we think is an appropriate property number cutoff. Alan?
Just one more background. The fees are built into the citywide fee structure. So that includes, like, when council adopts the fee ordinance, it includes the historic district fees, but then also things like, how much money are you paying to use the skate park? It's all a kind of unified fee ordinance. So
Dog licenses.
Mm-hmm.
So any recommendation that the commission would make would ultimately have to be presented to the council when they adopt the citywide fee ordinance, when they consider that. So it's kind of built into all the city's fees.
So just out of curiosity, do we know what prompted, it's almost a 300% increase in this particular fee? Because it
was
about
recognition of how much staff time goes into historic districts. The fee before was felt to be extremely low in relation to how much time it took. The city knows that we're not going to, like I said, we're not going to make all of that time back with the number of people going into it, with consultants who are often hired to do the surveys. But the city wants to see a certain commitment from the neighborhood groups or the individuals applying to make sure that they're ready to take the step forward.
We've had now two really small historic districts, I guess Royal and Cottage Grove, and then you have the 100 plus, and then Ross Moyne was over 500, right? Is there any correlation, when you look at the data, between how many houses, the small, the medium, and the large, and how much it costs the city to run through this process?
Yeah, the data, the dollars are kind of skewed based on just the economy since we started districts till now. The price that we got for the Ross Moyne district, we had bids all over the place. We had bids that were over twice as much as what we ultimately paid. That price was very low, and then we were able to offset it with a grant from the National Trust.
Just to be, don't mean to interrupt you, but just to be clear, for the Historic Resources Survey.
For the Historic Resource Survey,
Yeah,
yes.
I mean,
not
so
for the
that
whole
people
process.
out in the audience
yes.
know what we're talking about.
We're talking
Resource
about
survey, right.
the Historic Resources Survey as one
So-
part of the whole piece.
Yeah, so it's a little hard to do a per property price on that. Clearly, the survey portion of the project is where the extra money comes in. The historic research for a 15-property district is going to be similar, possibly, to a 500-property district in terms of just getting the research done and getting it on paper. The door-to-door, building-to-building survey is where that's going to take
The
up
money
more
comes
money. And there is the possibility, of a three-tiered system where we could add the 500 and over if we have any other large districts, or break it down. The thought was the difference from a 50-property district to a 100-district property isn't a huge one. That might be another day of survey in the field and then more writing to get the forms created. So we're kind of open. We could bring this back to you with kind of a more thought-out kind of structure, but here we wanted to just get some direction in terms of what the commission was kind of expecting or hoping for, and then we could re-agendize this for next month.
One other consideration we had discussed that I think the commission ought to chew on is if we try and make this tiering too nuanced, we might then encourage that neighborhoods that really should be like a 150-home historic district to capture the holistic character of a neighborhood start splitting themselves apart just because of the fee structure. So we don't want to build a fee structure that then encourages neighborhoods to sort of piecemeal themselves when really they might want to come in as at a more holistic larger number. Not that we have any particularly in mind that sort of fit at least 50 or 100 unit or 100 home historic districts. We haven't kind of pre-surveyed anything. We don't have any places in mind, but that was just one thought that we'd had about let's not try and slice the carrot up too much.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I was thinking myself that, you have to draw the line somewhere, and if there's too much disparity in the fee, that people might just like knock off one house to, get below the threshold, or...
Which we will try to prevent from happening. We're going to be on top of that.
So I was thinking more in terms of, and these are just thoughts, I'm just putting them out there, like 100 for the first cutoff, and then like maybe 101 to 250, and then maybe 250 and above, because I don't know. Jay, you have more experience, and overall, I don't know where to guess the majority of, proposed districts might fall. But we do have 3 below the 100 threshold right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got...
for a fourth in process.
Right, that's
Rockmont
below the
Park
100
is under
threshold.
100. Mm-hmm.
And then we've got, actually, the other two are over the 250.
Yeah, I would probably want to drop the bottom toward 50.
Really?
For the really small districts. It's seems a lot easier once we get to 80 or 90. The difference between that and 150 starts looking like it's not, because when surveyors are out there, there's economies of scale, and some surveyors, especially now that we're using tablet computers in the field, we're using bullet point survey forms instead of narrative survey forms that used to be super time consuming. It's become a lot faster for surveyors to kind of walk through a neighborhood and really get a sense of what's out there. Then that's an idea, just to really look at the cottage groves and the Royal Boulevards. And in fact, today, if Royal Boulevard had come forward, we probably would have encouraged them to consider being a larger district to encompass that aspect, Phase 2 of the Ross Moines subdivision. Since they were the first district we were still feeling the process out and didn't actually do that.
Right. Well, and as we discuss things, we should also keep in mind what the Glendale Historic Society mentioned at our last meeting was that there are now grants available, and so they could potentially help out some of the districts if it really came to a monetary issue and they couldn't, meet the fee.
We should base our decision assuming that's not going to be around
No.
forever, but it is a great thing while it's there.
Well, would it be a good idea, since it seems like we all think a tiering is good? You certainly can't do it by house. That would be nice, but it's just too complicated for you, since you have your fingers on the pulse of, how much surveying costs and what the economies of scale are, to come up with some kind of proposed fee schedule, or maybe a couple alternates based on different assumptions.
Yeah, and we could also talk to some of our friends in preservation consulting world and just get a sense of how have their new survey techniques really affected their prices, so that we can get a sense of,
That would be good.
how different will it really be.
There's similar communities who, I don't know what I mean by similar even, but, who do a tiered fee structure for things like this?
I'm not familiar. I haven't done any research, so I've never heard of that, but it's possible. So, taking your direction, we'll investigate a couple of schemes, base it on a little bit of research with the consulting community, and come back at our next meeting with at least a couple of proposals for you to weigh.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Thank you. Okay, agenda number 8A, which is update regarding the City Council discussion of proposed changes to the Glendale Municipal Code 2.76 and 15.20.
I was hoping to come back with an actual report of what council decided. Whenever we introduce an ordinance, it's a two-step process. The first step is to introduce the ordinance, which is where there's public testimony, staff makes a presentation and explains what the goals of the changes are, and then the next week, council will vote, which is usually kind of a pro forma vote based on their thoughts during that week. What happened last week at council was there was a contentious item before our item came up There were some employees or recently laid off employees in the audience kind of waiting to be heard, and there was a sense that council was not ready to talk about this in full, so there was no real discussion about it, and I wasn't able to give the full presentation. What we've heard is that council, even before the Glendale News Press article came out that you probably have seen, council would want to discuss this more at the upcoming meeting. And I'm not sure if we know at this point if they're going to reopen the public testimony portion of the hearing. Usually they don't for the vote on an ordinance, but they may have questions for staff. And it would be great if some of the commissioners could be in the audience. They probably won't have direct questions for you, but if they do, it would be good to have representation there, since this is something that you've kind of felt was a good move forward. And basically the issues that I called out in the staff report that I'll reiterate tomorrow are like the areas where we make big changes. So Ordinance 2.76, which is about the Historic Preservation Commission, we basically just did cosmetic changes and formalized how the election structure works for the chair and the vice chair. But Section 1520, which is really the heart of the Historic Preservation Ordinance, which establishes the Glendale Register, establishes the criteria for designation, talks about the process for how we regulate properties once they're listed, also has a lot of just cleanups and cosmetic changes. But I called out three major areas of change. The first was in the section where we talk about definitions. And for the most part, I don't think any of these are controversial. What it does is make the document much more clear. It really gives property owners and staff, basically, and council and the commission kind of more information about what is a major alteration, what is a minor alteration, why do we do preservation in Glendale, why is it important. So there are a number of different sections that get defined and listed out. The other two sections are kind of the more substantive things, I think. The first was where we were reducing the number of criteria from 7 to 5. The first 4 of the new proposed criteria very closely match the National Register and the California Register language and concept. And all 4 of those were existing criteria that we had before, but we're changing the language. So criterion 1 would reflect significant events. Criterion 2 would reflect significant people. Number 3 would be significant architecture, and number 4 would be archaeological resources. The biggest change is in number 3, where we're getting rid of the section that talks about one of the best remaining examples in the neighborhood, which we struggle with on a monthly basis with our nominations. And it establishes a broader ultimate criterion, but it's in keeping with how other cities and the state and the federal government do it. And so it's a strong recommendation from the State Preservation Office that we kind of try to align our criteria with those standards. And then we added the 5th criterion, which is for properties that have exemplify the early heritage of the city. And this was the criterion that we're looking at in terms, it's especially kind of driven by the Craftsman Survey, where we looked at almost 2,000 properties, and we came up with 55 properties that were eligible for the Glendale Register. But we came up with a few hundred that are actually really nice craftsman properties, very intact, but they just don't have that extra architectural character that kind of brought them up to another level, or we had so many examples of that type, and it was a fairly simple type. So the idea with this part of this 5th criterion is not that we're going to start designating every little old house in the city, but it gives the city a chance to kind of use its policy to encourage people to preserve some of these specimens. And the idea is, but the commission's not bound by this, but this would be a policy that we could put into the commissioner handbook, would be to look at it as an incentive, where if an owner decides, hey, now that I thought about it, maybe I don't have to tear down my craftsman house. Maybe I could put 2 units in the backyard and still get a 3 units on the property where there used to be 1. The idea is if the property does meet certain criteria, has a level of integrity, isn't just an old house, the commission might decide that it was worthy of designation so that we could extend the Mills Act to the owner as an incentive. We originally tried to see if there were other ways to give the Mills Act to property owners, but the way it's written in state law, it has to be a designated property at either the local, state, or federal level. So this would give us the opportunity, and we did this in consultation with SHPO. They basically said, write this criterion as broadly as possible, but then the city will use it as a policy tool to kind of further its goal, its preservation goals. And the buffer we have to prevent someone who just happens to have a little nice craftsman house that doesn't have much else going for it is that the commission and city council have to look at it. So it's still going to be reviewed. There's still 2 steps of public hearing and public review process to make sure that we're using this criterion in the way that the commission wants to, but it has enough flexibility so that 50 years from now, when Spanish colonial revival houses are rare in Glendale, perhaps, hopefully not, it could still apply to talk about early heritage of the city. So it's not something, I shouldn't focus only on craftsmen, but that's kind of what comes to mind in terms of how it would be most useful. But it could apply to industrial properties. It could apply to any building type or period, as long as it's reflects early heritage rather than, something more recent. So that's one of the big ones. And then the other big one was in terms of the designation and nomination process. Right now, owner consent is required for every property that's designated on the Glendale Register, and that's been the city's policy since 1996. Interestingly, before 1996, we did not require owner consent in Glendale. So when the amendments were made in 96, that provision came in, and it's worked well for the city. We don't have some of the contentious designation, last-minute designation problems that Los Angeles and other cities have, and so we have a fairly civilized process. What's missing, though, is if there was ever a property that was threatened and the population, the people, the neighborhood groups, the council itself, the commission itself, were all very, very concerned about the fate of this property, which I always picture is going to be more than just a single-family house. It's probably going to be something that has broad value to the broad community. What this provision would do is it would allow city council to nominate the property. So the nomination would have to come from city council through a 4 out of 5 vote. So that's a supermajority vote. Then we'd go through the regular process where we would prepare a nomination. Historic Preservation Commission would review the nomination, make an advisory vote, and then it would go back to city council, and designation would then require a 4/5 vote. Now, my sense is that this would rarely be used, maybe never be used, but it's there in case it ever needs to be used, and we don't have anything now. If, for example, the post office, which is on the Glendale Register and the National Register, if we imagine that that had no designation, and we learned that the Postal Service is considering selling it, and we found out that the buyer was interested in demolishing it, designation would be one of the possible ways that the city could move forward to protect a property like that. And right now, the city couldn't do that. So and we were pretty clear, we didn't want the commission to be able to designate properties. We didn't want people from the community, because that's a big step away from what we have right now, even though other cities do have a policy that doesn't require owner consent. So the idea was to kind of make it a very strict and difficult process to make it through, and obviously one that we don't think we're going to use very much, but it'll be there. And this is what the Glendale News Press article is about. I assume tomorrow night this will be the focus of the discussion, because it is kind of a big step away from what we do. But I think it's an important step to make our ordinance a little bit stronger than it is right now. We have a good ordinance right now, but it makes it a little bit stronger, and it protects the city for that what-if kind of situation. So those are the 3 things, unless council comes up with other issues they have. But when I was reviewing it and kind of pulling out what I thought was most important, those were the 3 things I called to their attention.
Jay, just to clarify, this would be a two-step process, to nominate it through supermajority and then designate it through supermajority.
Right.
So it would
with
not
with
be
an intermediate
a very,
step with
the commission.
the Historic Preservation Commission.
So it would not be something that's easily done.
I can only imagine it being done if there would have to be a great deal of public outcry and public
Right.
support for a project that would get designated. I don't think the council would just take it on themselves
Right.
to do this. It would have to be something that means a lot to the city. So. Okay. So I guess at our next meeting, we will get
an
another
update.
update of
We will
what
have an
happened.
update.
Okay. The last item is 8B, And this is an update regarding the Civic Center walking tour, which would be a potential co-sponsored event with the Glendale Historic Society for next year's Preservation Month.
And this, I just want to, we've talked to the Historical Society, and we thought, okay, let's, before the year ends, let's have our point person so we know what the team is that's going to be working on this. And they've assigned their, I can't remember, Marcia Hanford, who's amazing, does a lot of event programming for the Society. So she'll be working with us on that. And I picture, starting next month, but certainly in January, we'll really start moving on that. We've already got a lot of the text transcribed by Marcia from previous tours that we've done. Of course, we'll update it. We're going to create a nice brochure and then get the word out and kind of have a tour that'll not just be a Historic Preservation Month tour, but then it'll be something that's available for people who, it'll be online, and we probably have some printed versions, and people can learn more about the Civic Center.
Great.
But we haven't forgotten
you.
about that.
That's
Yeah. And then one thing that I didn't agendize, but we don't need to, is just we're canceling our November meeting and our December Christmas time meeting and consolidating for early December. And I can't remember if I remember we talked about either the 3rd or the 10th of December. Did we finalize that?
I don't think so.
No.
Any
for most of
thoughts
us,
or
both
options?
As I recall, both dates worked for most of us. I
Yeah.
think.
I think
Okay.
so.
Okay, good. So
Maybe earlier in the month better.
Okay,
Are
so
you
we'll
guys okay with
prioritize the
that?
3rd unless there's a conflict with another
Third.
another
December
board or
gets busy.
commission.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Arlene.
Oh, okay. Just one question. In the minutes of the last meeting, there's a comment on 6F about commissioners volunteering to assist with the writing of nominations for city-owned properties, and it says staff will provide a list of commitments at the next hearing. And I know that
Interesting.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, because certainly the word commitment, everybody is like, what commitment? But
I did write down the list. I have most of you committed to one property. I don't have it in my head. So at the next meeting, I'll bring that back.
Okay, but the reason I wanted to ask about it was not only because of that, but I know that the Historical Society has this really active preservation advocacy committee now, and that they had already begun the process of starting to research some of these properties. So they, just to make sure we don't reinvent the wheel, there were already people in the community on that
We're working
committee who were working on things.
on
so
nominations? or-
Probably, yes.
Okay, so we'll check
So,
with them.
just to make sure we don't double commit.
We've already, our intern Eileen, who I introduced to you earlier, Eileen Babahani, is here, and Christina Park is also here, so we have both of our excellent preservation interns in the house today. Eileen has prepared a first draft of a nomination for this building.
Oh, great.
So that's currently under review, and we'll be moving that forward slowly but surely, the way things are going these days, so.
Right?
Excellent. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Jay, I also had a quick question. When we reviewed 15.20 last time, we had talked about some changes, specifically for deletion of a historic resource, and then I think you were going to broaden the language about an application to list a property on the register. If it were denied, wouldn't have to necessarily wait 5 years. Will we be able to see?
We took care of all of that, and I thought it was in your last review package, or was that at?
Last
This
revision.
last one?
Yeah.
I
5-year
didn't-
thing was taken out of the proposed ordinance?
If you want to wait, I could go grab it.
And maybe it wasn't attached
since
to
we
made,
did
but I didn't
agendize
get
that,
it.
we could
I
talk
think I
about it.
attached everything.
Yeah, but we took care
Right,
of that,
printed
and off the
everything.
top of my head, we made a process for nominations that are kind of in limbo, so for how long that can stay in limbo before we withdraw the application. And what was the second part of your question?
Well, I think we already had under 1520F that an application will be automatically withdrawn.
Right, we
if
changed that a little
withdrawal notice
bit.
not received
And
within
then for
6
and then for
months.
resubmission of a nomination, we had a 5-year waiting period unless the Director of Community Development finds that new information that wasn't available to the commission at the first
Information or
hearing.
possibly new
Right.
owners who might be willing to make changes
Yeah.
that prior owners hadn't made. And then we had a process that said that a property owner would submit a form for a deletion, or city council would recommend a deletion, but then I think I heard that that form doesn't actually exist.
There's
and
no,
so
we did change something in the deletion section, but I can't think of it off the top of my head, so. If you want, I could go grab it, so, or.
No, if you just want to,
Pull it up.
I don't know what the commission wishes, but if you just want to
Can you
forward
just
it, I'd be happy to
email
look
us the
at it.
latest version?
Sure. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the relevant version would be the one that council is going to be considering tomorrow night,
That's
correct?
what I was
Right.
going to.
Yeah.
Is that posted?
Should be, yes.
Because it's.
Yeah, it's
council
posted
meeting
for
tomorrow.
last week's hearing. I don't know that it would be up again for this. If there's a link to it from last week's hearing, definitely. No, I'll send it to you all this
Yeah,
afternoon.
typically when the council reviews ordinances, the week they introduce it, it'll be the strikeout version, is the one they'll see. And then, so last week they would have seen the strikeout version. This week, the council package should be the clean version that they would actually be adopting.
But I'll send you the strikeout version so you can see where the changes were made.
Strikeout.
Right, so
Super, thank you.
the council agenda for tonight should include the clean version.
Do you have anything else?
Not me.
Okay, that's the last of our agenda. So with that, we'll move to adjournment.